In this unit, we're going to talk about national interest and how one nation's interest can conflict with the interests of another nation. So what do I mean by interest? Well, let me ask you, what's in your best interest? And how do your best interests influence others? And do you think those best interests change over time? What influences your efforts to meet that best interest? Okay, I know that's a lot, but let's take school for example. It's in your best interest to pay attention to the information in the video so that you can be successful. How does your success in school influence others? Well, it reflects on the efforts of your parents and the school. It can also influence the community through your ability to contribute in a meaningful way both while you're in school and when you graduate, which of course will be a time when what's in your best interest is going to change. And the goals you may have of like getting a good job or living in a nice neighborhood are going to motivate your efforts to be successful now. Well, it's the same with nations and nation states. As a nation grows and matures, what's in its best interest changes. And like a big family, the nations and nation states of the world strive to get along, but it doesn't always work out that way. Like siblings, we disagree with each other and sometimes we fight. Globally, nation states may disagree on the best approach to major issues like climate change or the response to terrorism, and that viewpoint is often rooted in the belief that what's in the best interest for my nation state isn't necessarily what's best for yours, but I'm going to put my nation state first. And the forces of nationalism really were the root cause of this terrible war. How? Well, nation-states like Germany were quite militaristic, and this led to an arms race with England over their naval power. It was in the national interest of Germany to have a strong military to protect its interests and promote patriotism. Another way that nationalism played a role was through imperialism. If you remember in Social 10, you looked at the nation-states of Europe going around the planet claiming territory for themselves in order to gain economic, political, and social status for their people. Well, there was also competition for land within Europe, and we're going to get to that in a second. Thirdly, there were alliances created at the end of the 19th century so that the nation-states could protect their national interests by having fellow nations back them up if and when they were threatened. So there was the Triple Alliance of Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, and the Triple Entente of Britain, France, and Russia. So let's look at what exactly happened to get this all started. By 1914, things are changing in Europe. Many of the old empires are starting to crumble. As their power weakens, the local nations within the nation-state start to see themselves as distinct and want the opportunity to govern themselves. They want a degree of sovereignty. But of course, other nations see it as being in their best interest to rule over them. This happened in the Balkan Peninsula. Serbia was a small nation-state that wanted to expand their control over neighboring Slavic states. But that comes into direct conflict with Austria-Hungary's desire to expand their empire. In the background is Russia, who doesn't necessarily want to directly control the region, but sees themselves as a protector of the Slavic people and supports any efforts to limit the power of the Austro-Hungarians. Now let me just take a second to talk about the Austro-Hungarian Empire because this region is filled with so many different nationalities. There's Austrians, Hungarians, Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, I could go on. And as the Enlightenment ideas are slowly spreading throughout Europe, the Austro-Hungarian leaders are finding it more and more difficult to control their regions. This is where the alliances come in. By having an alliance with Germany and Italy, Austria-Hungary can know that if any outsiders start to threaten them, because they might seem to be weak, they have those two allies who have their back. You can see on the map that this Balkan Peninsula has many different nations and nation-states, and when the national interests of these groups clash, it can cause catastrophic results. This is why we call the region the powder keg of Europe. Okay, so let's go through the actual events. Austria-Hungary sees that Bosnia is ripe for the taking and annexes it. Well, Serbia can't have that because they want to be the controlling power in the region. So now the Serbs are right ticked off that Austria-Hungary is horning in on their turf, and terrorist groups like the Black Hand start to develop in the region to try and fight the massive empire's expansion. In June, the Archduke of Austria decides he's going to go visit his new little territory of Bosnia. His advisors tell him it is not a good idea, but he goes to the capital city of Sarajevo anyways. And guess what? A terrorist kills him. Now, seriously, you should look up the story of how bungled the whole thing was. It was not a set of well-trained assassins. So now what? A member of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy has been assassinated. How would you react? Austria-Hungary demands that Serbia allow them to come in and investigate the terrorist group, which Serbia refuses. So Austria-Hungary says, if you don't let us come in, we're going to wage war on you for harboring terrorists. Kind of oddly familiar to the events in 2001. Well, war is officially declared on July 28th, and Russia starts to mobilize her troops in order to be ready to support the Serbs. That leads to Germany declaring war on Russia because they're allied with Austria-Hungary, so then France declares war on Germany because they're allied with Russia, and of course Germany says, let's go, and moves to invade France. Germany is pumped up to show their military might, especially to use those new warships they've been building. But they're not going to go straight through the border with France because the French are going to be ready for them. There's another issue. Because France and Russia are allies, if Germany wages war on either one of them, it means a two-front war. So a military leader named Schlieffen came up with a plan that would deal with this problem. Russia was not nearly as industrialized as France, so it would take them longer to get their troops moving. So if Germany could quickly neutralize France, they could then turn around and deal with Russia, avoiding a two-front war. And the best way to defeat France is to surprise them, come at them from the west, which they totally would not expect. Of course, that would mean that Germany would have to go through Belgium to get to western France. But wait a minute, Belgium is neutral, so they don't want any part of this. In 1839, a treaty had been signed by many major nations in Europe, including Germany, to protect the neutrality of Belgium. So when Britain actually enforces this almost century-old treaty, the German chancellor said he was surprised that Britain and Germany are going to end up going over to war over a mere scrap piece of paper. You might have noticed that the countries I'm listing are all in Europe, so why do we call it a world war? Well, don't forget, many of those nations have overseas colonies and they're enlisting the colonists to come and fight. Even though Canada was a sovereign nation state at this point, we actually didn't have full sovereignty. We could control anything that happened within the country, our domestic affairs, but Britain still had control over our foreign affairs. So when Britain joined the war, so did Canada. So you can see this was like a domino effect that just kept getting bigger, kind of like a snowball going downhill. The last thing I want to talk about is the blame for World War I. Many people want to find just one country guilty for the whole thing, but it's not that simple. Let's start with Serbia. They had encouraged the resistance to the expansionist policies of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and refused to cooperate with them when the Austro-Hungarians wanted to come in and investigate. That's because they felt it was in their national interest to take a strong stand in order to give them greater control over the Slavic people in the region. But what about Austria-Hungary? The Archduke could have been a lot more understanding about the sore feelings over the Bosnian takeover, and they really didn't have to declare war to get the terrorist issue solved. But they felt that if war was waged, they could gain even more territory, which was in their self-interest. Now, Germany is often thought of as the main reason for starting the war. Well, they did invade a neutral territory, and they were the ones who aggressively encouraged Austria-Hungary to declare war. Remember, they wanted to show off their military strength to promote their national interest. Of course, that German invasion of neutral territory is what got Britain into the mix. Did they really need to uphold that scrap of paper, so-called, when the other signatories to the Belgian Neutrality Treaty really didn't pay much attention to it? And Britain doesn't want some upstart country like Germany making them look weak, so it is in their national interest to get involved. And what about Britain's Triple Entente allies? Well, France is still bitter about the Franco-Prussian War and the loss of the Alsace-Lorraine. What better chance to get it back than to actually win a war against Germany? And Russia saw itself as the protector of the Slavic people and supported the Serbian aggression to promote this national identity. And they were the first ones to mobilize their troops. So, whose fault is it?